coming up on The World Today. Russian-backed officials hold self-styled referendums on joining Russia in 4 occupied regions of Ukraine as neighboring countries report queues at border crossings over Russia's conscription. South Korean students skip school to call for climate change action as protests erupt around the world. And the UK announces significant tax cuts not seen since 1972. Welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. It's the 212th day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Russia's defense ministry has revealed a host of occupations it says will be exempted from conscription aimed at boosting its war effort in Ukraine. IT workers, bankers and journalists working for state media will escape the partial mobilization, this announced by President Vladimir Putin Wednesday. Around 300,000 citizens face being called up as part of the drive. The move has prompted a rush towards the border as young men attempt to flee to evade the draft. Announcing the exemptions today, Russia's defense ministry said employers must compile a list of workers who meet the criteria and submit it to its offices. Well, elsewhere, voting in the provinces of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporizhia are taking place. The referendums, which have been discussed for months by Moscow's installed authorities in the 4 regions. Russian media reported that electoral officials would go from door to door with portable ballot boxes from Friday today to Monday, and that polling stations will only operate on the 5th day, the 27th of September, with officials citing security reasons. The referendums, which have been condemned by Ukraine, Western leaders and the United Nations as an illegitimate choreographed precursor to illegal annexation, represents about 15% of Ukrainian territory and is due to run from Friday to Tuesday.
Russian-backed officials in 4 occupied regions of Ukraine are holding self-styled referendums on joining Russia. Denounced as illegitimate and a sham by Ukraine and the West, the votes are taking place over 5 days, while all 4 areas, 2 in the east and 2 in the south, are on the front line. Over in Luhansk, the military is voting on referendum on joining Russia, saying they waited 8 years for this opportunity, promising transparent voting process.
Today we have something to celebrate. A very remarkable day. Today, at last, something we've been waiting for 8 years as we suffered, is finally happening. Today, we're holding a referendum. The first day of voting on the self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Republic joining the Russian Federation. As a legal entity of it, we've been waiting for it for a long time. It was a tortuous time for us. A lot of lives were lost for it.
The Russian installed deputy head of Ukraine's southern Kherson region also cast his votes today in a referendum on the region joining Russia. According to him, all his family, relatives, brothers and sisters are voting not only to join Russia, they're voting for their future.
Всего хорошего и за будущее наших детей.
The referendums had been discussed for months by Moscow-installed authorities in the 4 regions, in Ukraine's east and southeast. Meanwhile, following Russia's announcement and calling up 300,000 extra troops, traffic into Finland across its southeastern border with Russia was heavy earlier today. Border guards told local news that the number of Russians who entered the previous day was more than double the amount who arrived the week before. Finland is considering barring most Russians from entering as the volume of arrivals from its eastern neighbor intensified on Thursday following President Vladimir Putin's order for a partial military mobilization. About 7,000 people entered from Russia on Thursday, some 6,000 of them Russian, meaning a 107% increase compared with the same day a week earlier, according to border guards. Elsewhere, All efforts conducive to a peaceful settlement of the Ukraine crisis should be supported, said Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbing at a press briefing in Beijing. Wang made the statement in response to United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres' latest remarks to the Security Council on Ukraine.
We have enunciated China's position on the Ukraine issue on many occasions. We always maintain that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries should be respected. China appeals to all the relevant parties to properly resolve the differences through dialogue and consultation. We are willing to work with the rest of the international community to continue playing a constructive role in de-escalating the situation.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Thursday called for international efforts to de-escalate the conflict in Ukraine.
Well, joining us for more, Mr. Temitope Oludo is a security analyst, and he joins us from London. Thank you for joining us on the program. What's your take on the Russian-backed separatists and their wanting a referendum to join Russia? We understand that, this is ongoing at the moment and will continue until next week, Tuesday.
Yes, it's a new development that could actually spell a bit of concern for the world. There's no doubt that we must accept that those areas see themselves, majority of the people in those areas see themselves as being Russia anyway because they're Russian speaking. However, that being said, this is the only time that I'm aware of where people are holding referendum in a war situation or wartime situation, and even taking ballots, mobile ballots to people's house. So there's no doubt that at the end of the 4 days, definitely most of those areas there might be a larger vote or larger percentage of individuals wanting to be part of Russia. But that is the question then. That is when we need to start asking the question, what happens then? Because, the Russia president has been, blowing hot and cold that he will use any other means. And if those areas are taken over to be part of Russia territory, if Ukraine then attacks those areas or attack Russia forces in those areas, it's more or less as if you're attacking Russia. Would Russia then resort to nuclear weapon, or what would they do? I think that is the question that many analysts are asking, and many people watching this unfolding situation are concerned about.
Indeed, and the West is reacting, saying it's all a sham, including Kyiv as well. One also begins to wonder about the voices that might not agree to this referendum and what they should do in this case, because who is going to help them save the day? They might just have to actually leave those particular areas if they can. But then, looking at President Putin's, his what do I call it now? His pronouncements, his body language, raising the specter of nuclear conflict, which he has said is a possibility, but then calling up the reservists. And today we're hearing that they've told companies in Russia to sort of draw up a list of those who can make up that number. What do you make of all of this playing out? And he says, it's not a bluff.
We could see the difference between Ukraine and Russia from this whole scenario. In Ukraine, no, of course, they did ask all the young men to stay, but you notice that a lot of them were willing to stay. In every situation, even when you have 10, there are 2 that want to, more or less say, no, we're not interested. But with 1,000 people protesting being arrested in Russia, people rushing through Finland, trying to escape by all means, just shows you that the people do not have appetite for the war. People are not interested. And we know that even though it's not a full-blown mobilization, there are concerns that a lot of people, even within Russia, are not interested. And it has the political angle to it that it needs to be quite worried about. Of course, we know there is deputy prime minister, deputy foreign minister has said that is not the case. They're not looking at even going into nuclear weapon. But the former president have actually said that they will use nuclear weapons for their own protection. So there are two voices coming out of Russia. Those that are supporting the president and those that are saying, no, this is not the situation on ground. But we know from what we've seen from our TV screen, a lot of people in Russia, a lot of families in Russia are not interested in this war. And how could we then resolve this issue? And I think that's why what the Chinese have said, that there is need for us to find a lasting solution. I know that President Biden did say that nobody is looking at going into war with Russia. Of course, they said that, but the bottom line is that they are fueling this war by allowing, you giving Ukraine the kind of ammunition and things, support that it needs to be able to give Russia the bloody nose. And Russia will not back down for the look of things.
And we understand more sanctions are also coming forward. But Russia's president did say he accused the US, the EU and Britain of encouraging Ukraine to push military operations into Russia itself. I mean, do you think the West is crossing every line in this and, perhaps fueling this in a way that, if they need to draw back, he might reconsider, or will the presidents of Russia still push on? Because I'm looking at, when next we will see negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow.
It's a double sword. It's a catch-22. If the West had stayed behind and been a neutral party, there will be no Ukraine as we speak today, because Ukraine will have been consumed, whether we like it or not. And if they are not consumed, many more people will have died. We know that the UK government have been training thousands and thousands of people. And what we've seen so far in these 7 months of this hostility and conflict is that Ukraine is getting better. 2-3 months ago, it was more like, they hit you, you try and they complain a bit, but now they're actually taking the battle to the Russians and winning back their territory. So you could see the fruit of all the weapons and billions that have been thrown into this war. You could see the fruit coming out. And I've said many times on your channels, on Channels TV, that Ukraine is the battleground, whether we like it or not. The weapon that is being used in Ukraine, the way the war is being fought, is revealing a lot about the Russians' military might. And that is opening up a lot of channels. And of course, the Chinese are also looking, because we have the Taiwan issue and the other areas. So it is a test case, whether we like it or not. And whether we like it or not, we might say that maybe the West have crossed the border. The West have not put boots on the ground, but they have been involved, whether we like it or not, indirectly, by giving the gloves to the little boy to fight the bully. And that is what is happening right now.
Do you see an even more direct, confrontation with the way things are now?
I think it will be very difficult for anybody to predict whether there will be more direct intervention by the West. But there is no doubt that if, for example, there is a use of nuclear weapon, or there's something that is more advanced than this, then the West might show interest and coming together quite quickly, to intervene. But I don't think anybody wants, like the Russian deputy foreign minister said, nobody will win. There's no win-win if there is a use of nuclear weapon, and nobody wants it to get to that point. I think the Russian president is hot. His reputation has been damaged, and his people again are not supporting him, because we're not seeing that support. They can't mask up all the kind of descending voice coming out of Russia, and that is not good for him. And that's the reason why he needs to get this war done and dusted quickly. And one of the ways he could do that is through this referendum, because if those areas become part of Russia, then attacking that area is more or less attacking Russia. And that is the area that every one of us need to be looking at for the next few days.
We continue to watch the developments there. We'd like to appreciate your time. Mr. Temitope Oludo is a security analyst. Thank you for joining us always.
Thank you for having me.
Well, several German government ministers have indicated that under specific conditions, Germany is ready to take in Russians fleeing partial military mobilization ordered by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Interior Minister Nancy Faeser said in an interview that deserters threatened with serious repression can, as a rule, obtain international protection in Germany. Anyone who courageously opposes Putin's regime and thereby falls into great danger can file for asylum on grounds of political persecution. German Justice Minister later tweeted, using the hashtag partial mobilization, that apparently many Russians are leaving their homeland. Anyone who hates President Putin's path and loves liberal democracy is welcome in Germany. Meanwhile, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock praised Russian anti-war protesters and added that no one inside the country can continue turning a blind eye to what's happening in Ukraine, because every Russian is now going to be at risk of being drafted into this war. Deutsche Welle correspondent Clifford Coonan joins me now for more. Clifford, on what grounds is Germany prepared to, accept Russians fleeing? What more grounds are they saying fleeing this military conscription?
Well, several German government ministers have indicated that under specific conditions, Germany is ready to take in Russians who are fleeing the partial military mobilization that Vladimir Putin has just ordered. The main condition is that deserters threatened with serious repression can, as a rule, obtain international protection here in Germany. The European Commission has also said that people fleeing partial mobilization in Russia have the right to claim asylum in the EU. Now, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has praised Russian anti-war protesters and added that no one inside the country can continue turning a blind eye to what's happening in Ukraine. She says that every Russian is now going to be at risk of being drafted into this war. So since Putin declared a partial mobilization of reservists, flights for the coming days from Russia to visa-free countries such as Turkey and Serbia have sold out entirely.
Clifford, let's talk about how the war is playing out in Germany so far. What impact are we seeing?
Well, the big fear here in Germany is that winter is coming, temperatures are dropping and the Russians have turned off the gas. Around half of all German households are heated by natural gas, so Germany needs Russia's gas to heat the homes and also to run its factories. There's a big industrial aspect to this too. So Germany's doing all it can to save energy. They've been building up reserves. The estimates are that storage tanks are currently around 90% full, and they're probably going to fill a little bit more by the time winter comes around. Also, spiralling energy costs mean that Germany is planning to nationalise the gas giant supplier Uniper. Russia's gas supply freeze has threatened to drive the company into bankruptcy. And we've also seen here that Germany's introduced a gas surcharge, which goes into effect as planned on October 1. Everyone has to pay a levy of around 2.4 euro cents per kilowatt hour. Now, the Ukrainians have little sympathy. President Volodymyr Zelensky's economic advisor told us this week that they've lots of homes without roofs, let alone no heating. And it's also in danger of turning into a major political row here. The Conservative opposition wants Germany's nuclear power plants brought back online.
Clifford, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is visiting Saudi Arabia. What will be his priorities during the visit?
Well, I imagine there's going to be three priorities: energy, energy and more energy. Scholz is due to meet Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh on Saturday during his two-day visit to the Gulf. He's also going to the United Arab Emirates and to Qatar. He's expected to sign liquid natural gas contracts during this trip to the Gulf. Now, it's interesting and shows what a difference a year can make, because you recall how bin Salman became somewhat of a pariah in the West after the 2018 assassination of the dissident Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So the days when Scholz would have addressed human rights issues on a trip like this seem to be in the rearview mirror. We've already seen US President Joe Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron meeting with the Saudi leader this year. But as rising oil prices and Europe's energy crisis put Western economies on the back foot, it looks like it's Olaf Scholz's turn to court MBS.
We continue to follow the updates. We appreciate your time. Deutsche Welle correspondent Clifford Coonan there, joining us from Berlin. Well, still to come on the programme. US reports 24,000 plus monkeypox cases, the world's highest tally. We also have more on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Stay with us. Welcome back. And while world leaders gathering at the United Nations General Assembly in New York are calling for Russia to be held accountable for human rights violations in Ukraine, the chair of an independent commission of inquiry on Ukraine has concluded that war crimes have been committed following investigations conducted in 4 regions of the country. According to Eric Mose, the commission has received credible allegations regarding many more cases of executions. It did not say explicitly who had committed the crimes, but the Commission's work was focused in areas of Ukraine previously occupied by Russian forces such as Kyiv, Chernihiv, Kharkiv and Sumy. Russia was called on to respond to the allegations at the Council meeting, but its seat was left empty. Russia regularly denies deliberately attacking civilians during what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine, and has said in the past that accusations of human rights abuses are a smear campaign.
We're struck by the large number of executions in the areas that we visited. The Commission is currently investigating such deaths in 16 towns and settlements. We have received credible allegations regarding many more cases of executions, which we are documenting further. Common elements of such crimes include the prior detention of the victims, as well as visible signs of executions on bodies, such as hands tied behind backs, gunshot wounds to the head, and slit throats. Investigating cases related to sexual and gender-based violence present specific challenges. The Commission has found that some Russian Federation soldiers committed such crimes. These acts amounted to different types of violation of rights, including sexual violence, torture, and cruel and inhuman treatment. There are examples of cases where relatives were forced to witness the crimes. In the cases we have investigated, the age of victims of sexual and gender-based violence ranged from 4 to 82 years.
The evidence of Russia's atrocities becomes more horrifying by the day, most recently with the uncovering of mass graves in Izium, where the bodies show signs of torture. We urge the commissioners to continue to examine the growing evidence of Russia's filtration operations, forced deportations, and disappearances. Numerous sources indicate Russian authorities have interrogated, detained, and or forcibly deported between 900,000 and 1.6 million Ukrainian citizens. The Russian government is reportedly deporting children from Ukraine.
And to other stories, a blast rocked the Afghan capital this afternoon, according to Interior Ministry, after a loud explosion was heard in a heavily fortified central part of the city. It is not immediately clear who or what was behind the explosion, which was confirmed by the Interior Ministry spokesperson Bismillah Habib. Footage released via local broadcaster Tolu Television showed plumes of smoke rising from an area it identified as being near Kabul's Wazir Mohammed Akbar Khan Mosque. Witnesses recall hearing the blast around the time of afternoon prayers in Wazir Akbar Khan, an area of the capital once home to the city's green zone, where many foreign embassies and NATO were based and is now controlled by the ruling Taliban. Several deadly blasts have taken place at mosques during Friday prayers in recent months, some of which have been claimed by Islamic State. And over in Britain, the new Finance Minister, Kwasi Kwarteng, has announced historic tax cuts and huge increases in borrowing. as part of an economic agenda that floored financial markets with British government bonds in free fall. Well, he scrapped the country's top rate of income tax and for the first time put a price tag on the spending plans of Prime Minister Liz Truss, who wants to double Britain's rate of economic growth. Investors unloaded short-dated British government bonds as fast as they could, with two-year gilts on track for their biggest one-day fall since at least 2009, as Britain raised its debt issuance plans for the current financial year by £72.4 billion.
The Bank of England are taking further steps to control inflation, acting again only yesterday. And I can assure the House that this government considers the Bank of England's independence to be sacrosanct. And we remain closely coordinated with the Governor and myself, speaking twice a week. Secondly, we need a new approach for a new era, focused on growth. Our aim over the medium term is to reach a trend rate of growth of 2.5%. And our plan, Mr. Speaker, is to expand the supply side of the economy through tax incentives and reform. That is how we will deliver higher wages, greater opportunities, and crucially, Mr. Speaker, fund public services now and into the future. That is how we will compete successfully with dynamic economies around the world. And that is how, Mr. Speaker, we will turn this vicious cycle of stagnation into a virtuous cycle of growth.
In the meantime, reactions have been trailing the finance minister's announcement in Parliament. Paul Gregory said that the government's announcements today provided nowhere near enough support for low earners in the UK. However, some others welcomed the mini budget, but they remain concerned for those most in need.
Awful, obviously. I mean, the people that are poor right now, that are on lower incomes, they're struggling with their heating and all their bills. Everything's gone up. Why on earth would they be cutting it for the people in a higher income bracket? It's ridiculous. London's getting worse. England's getting worse, to be honest. So, yeah, it's a stupid move, a dumb move, obviously.
On the one hand, you could argue that it's a good strategy because it'll attract sort of businesses to come and set up their establishments in London. So to that extent, perhaps it is a good decision. But on the other hand, again, it's going to reduce the overall, say for instance, the money that can be allocated to welfare benefits, things like that. So to that extent, perhaps it's not a good decision.
I think it's great that there's a mini budget. I think we needed to pause, take a bit of time. We needed some change. So it's great to see that there has been a mini budget. I think for housing, if they haven't heard yet that they're looking to actually pause stamp duty, I think that would be a great idea because I think housing is going to face a bit of a challenge. But yeah, it's good to have a mini budget. I just wish that during this time of national crisis that we were spending a bit more on those most in need.
And away from Britain today, youth activists staging a coordinated global climate strike to highlight their fears about the effects of global warming and demand more aid for poor countries hit by wild weather. Protesters took to the streets in Indonesia, New Zealand and South Korea carrying banners and posters with slogans such as "We are worried about the climate crisis" and "It's not too late." The demonstrations were organised by the Fridays for Future Youth movement that took its cue from activist Greta Thunberg, who began protesting alone outside the Swedish parliament in 2018.
In South Korea, hundreds of students skipped school to attend a rally demanding more government action to address climate change. About 200 students gathered in central Seoul with placards written with this year's slogan, #PeopleNotProfit, calling for substantial action on climate change. This comes amid rising concerns on how vulnerable the country is to climate change-driven extreme weather.
I'm living with a sense of crisis, so I think it is more important to deliver my concerns to the government to take preventive measures rather than going to school. What is important to me right now is not school tests, For me, surviving is the real test.
Joining the global protests as part of the student-led Fridays for Future movement, hundreds of demonstrators and environmentalists took to the streets of the Indonesian capital to demand action on climate change. Beating drums and shouting slogans, the activists decried Jakarta's worsening air pollution while condemning government policies towards industrial coal-fired plants.
As young people, we're gathering here to collaborate and work together as a collective group from various entities and regions to voice our aspirations regarding environmental issues so we can find solutions to climate change. We're tired of putting our hopes in the government.
Indonesia, the 8th biggest emitter of greenhouse gas, plans to phase out coal for electricity by 2056 as part of a plan to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2060 or earlier. And for the hundreds of demonstrators in New Zealand, the protest ground is outside Parliament House in Wellington, where the students demand more action on climate change, joining other countries in global protests. Led by the Friday for Future student movement, young protesters in the country chanted slogans and held up signs reading, "This is my social studies lesson, and I stand for what I stand on."
So if anybody tells you that your voice doesn't count and that you're too young to make a difference, do not believe them. It is because of young people that we even have the Zero Carbon Act in this country. That's because of you and people like you all around the country.
Apart from Wellington, other New Zealand cities, including Auckland, Christchurch and New Plymouth, are holding demonstrations, marches and rallies to draw attention to global warming and demand action from leaders.
China says it will continue to properly handle the maritime disputes with countries directly concerned through dialogue and consultation. This comes in response to US President Joe Biden's remarks on the South China Sea when he met with his Philippine counterpart. According to the Foreign Ministry spokesperson at a press briefing, it says Beijing will work with the Association of Southeast Asian Nation countries to safeguard peace and stability in the South China Sea. And to health. The health crisis in the U.S. continues to be of major concern for the Center for Disease Control, as the country has confirmed over 24,000 monkeypox cases, according to latest data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. California reported the most monkeypox cases, followed by New York, Florida, and Texas, according to the data. So far, the U.S. has the world's highest tally of monkeypox cases. The U.S. government's ineffective response to the epidemic has been widely criticized. Our correspondent, Maria Bird, has more.
The U.S. has suffered through the COVID-19 pandemic and continues to combat the monkeypox, as the U.S. has more than 30% of the world's cases of monkeypox.
To date, there have been over 59,000 cases of monkeypox reported globally, including over 22,000 cases and one confirmed death in the United States. We've been pleased to see a decline in the growth of new cases here and abroad, though there are areas in the United States where the rate of rise in new cases is still increasing. We approach this news with cautious optimism, recognizing that we must continue to aggressively respond to with our entire toolkit, including vaccination, testing, and education about risk to inform behavior change.
The U.S. established major interventions to curb the spread of the virus as they prioritize vaccinations.
Over 540,000 doses of vaccine have been administered across the 39 jurisdictions reporting data. Over the past few weeks, we've seen an increase in second doses administered as more people have become eligible for their second dose, specifically 28 days after their first dose. As a reminder, Jynneos is a 2-dose vaccine, and it is important to receive the second dose in the series to have the best protection against monkeypox, which current data suggest occurs 14 days after that second dose.
While the monkeypox is still spreading rapidly and considerations are being made to expand the access of vaccinations to all Americans, many Americans are putting additional health and safety precautions in place to protect themselves from the monkeypox virus. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channel Television News.
Joining us is health scientist Dr. Abdulaziz Bako for more on the situation. He joins me from Texas. Great to see you. What's your take on the rise or not of monkeypox cases in the U.S.? Would you say it's increasing, or there's just a lot of caution that is taking place by the CDC?
Yes. So thank you for having me. Yes, the rate of infection with the monkeypox virus has been increasing over the past few months. It has been rapidly increasing, but recently data shows that the rate of growth is slowing down. So calling for a cautious optimism about the fact that this disease might be slowing down. But the cases are still rising, but a little bit slower than they were before.
How effective would you say the U.S. government's response to the epidemic has been?
Actually, if you take both the COVID-19 pandemic as well as this epidemic of monkeypox virus, we will say that it shows the vulnerability of the United States public health system in terms of its ability to respond to epidemics and pandemics. So I think this is an avenue for health leaders and stakeholders to rethink about the public health preparedness of the United States.
Indeed, because there appear to be some fears in some parts of the country about repeating the mistakes during the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak. But the CDC data is reporting California with the highest monkeypox cases, over 4,000. And this is followed by New York, Florida, and then Texas, where you are, is in 4th place.
So these are the states with the largest number of people. So it is expected that these places would have the highest number of cases because they have the largest population. But in terms of the proportion, that is what will tell you whether they are having a disproportionate share of the infection. So, for example, data shows that Black population and Hispanics have a disproportionate share of the disease. They constitute about half of all the people that have the infection. And when we look at the total number of Blacks and Hispanics in the nation, across the nation, they're not up to half of the population, very much less than that.
How would you rate the strategy of vaccination for monkeypox in the U.S.?
Yeah, so currently it's mainly for high-risk individuals, mainly men who have sex with men and other individuals that are shown to be at high risk of acquiring the infection. That has been going well, and I think the vaccines that are made available, there's an increase in the number of people that are getting their full dose of the vaccine. So it's a cause for great optimism about the ability of the country to go past this infection, this epidemic.
All right, Dr. Abdulaziz Bako, health scientist, thank you for joining me and continue to stay safe.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's talk about the coronavirus now. Hong Kong residents have reacted with relief to the easing of quarantine restrictions, which will begin next week. Starting Monday, September 26, incoming travelers will no longer be required to stay in hotel quarantine after arriving, but will still have to undergo regular PCR testing and are prevented from entering some venues in the first 3 days after their arrival. All international arrivals will be able to return home or to an accommodation of their choice, but will have to self-monitor for 3 days after entering the Chinese Special Administrative Hub. They will be allowed to go to work or school, but will not be allowed to enter bars or restaurants for the period.
Oh, definitely happy. Like I said, Hong Kong it's about time to open up. We need to stay competitive on the global market, jobs, get the economy going. I'm looking forward to traveling again. It's been years, and I want to go home to Taiwan, to America, to see my family. Yeah, it'd be very good to be able to travel and fly again without the quarantine measures in place.
I'm very happy about the decision, finally. And it's, well, compared to other countries, obviously there's still some kind of restrictions, but I mean, it's still very good news for all of us. Yeah, actually, I've been checking the ticket prices as well. It has become more expensive, but I believe that as they have more flights coming into Hong Kong, the prices hopefully should come down soon.
Coming up on the program, South Sudan promotes 2025 elections at United Nations General Assembly. Stay with us. South Sudan's Vice President Hussein Abdelbagi Akol says the 2018 revitalized peace agreement effectively ended the internal conflict in South Sudan and has improved the security situation, allowing the internally displaced and refugees voluntarily return home. He, however, adds that more than half the country is facing acute food insecurity, prolonged drought, and the effects of COVID-19. He was speaking at the UN General Assembly in New York.
The implementation process of the revitalized peace agreement is facing numerous challenges, and sanctions imposed by international partners on individuals and entities are deserve discussed. As we make progress in implementation of the revitalized peace agreement on the resolution of the conflict in the Republic of South Sudan, we are calling upon international community and UN in particular to revise individual and targeted sanctions, arm embargo imposed on South Sudan to enable successful completion of remaining provision of the peace agreement outlined in the new roadmap. I am equally pleased to inform you that the parties to the agreement have agreed on a roadmap to complete remaining tasks in the peace agreement, which will pave way for a peaceful, fair, and credible election at the end of transitional period in 2025.
Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, President of the Federal Republic.
And Somalia's President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud warned of looming famine during his speech at the UN General Assembly. The United Nations has warned that parts of Somalia will be hit by famine in coming months as the Horn of Africa region faces a fifth consecutive failed rainy season. The projection is more severe than in 2011, when famine killed more than 250,000 Somalis, around half of whom were children.
In Somalia, we are working tirelessly to transition from over 2 decades of devastating conflict, droughts, famine, and developmental stagnation to a new age of stability, progress, and prosperity. However, despite our continuing effort, Somalia and its resilient people are facing some of the most complex and interconnected crises in the world. The crises include ongoing regional droughts, which is directly threatening the lives and the livelihoods of Somalia's most vulnerable communities. In fact, our government has called on all its business community, diaspora, and international partners international partners to work with us to do everything possible to avert a possible looming famine. In Somalia, we are actively fighting the terrorist group called Al-Shabaab, who are Al-Qaeda affiliate, and ISIS separately. Both are criminally misrepresenting the beautiful and the peaceful Islamic religion and values to destabilize the region and in the process terrorize the Somali people and their brothers and sisters in the neighboring countries and across the world. In recent weeks,
Meanwhile, top UN officials in Somalia have visited Jubaland to discuss humanitarian, security and political developments in the region. These are part of efforts to ensure the UN family is working side by side with local humanitarian partners in order to meet basic needs of the people.
A high-level delegation headed by the UN Secretary-General's Special Representative from Somalia, James Swan, meets with President Ahmed Mohamed Islam Madobe, members of his administration and representatives of the local civil society. Mr. Swan speaks about UN's commitment to continue advocating for more international donor support to prevent famine in Somalia.
This visit is one of several we are making to the federal member states to focus attention on the prolonged drought, which is the worst in 4 decades and has devastated and ravaged many parts of the country. Here in Jubaland, the drought has led to emergency levels of food insecurity. I urge federal and state officials in Somalia to continue to collaborate in addressing severe water shortages and drought conditions and to make further progress on security and governance to respond to the needs of the people.
According to the latest report of the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, about 7.8 million Somalis have been affected by the drought, with more than 1 million displaced by drought and searching for food, water, pasture and livelihoods. This year's humanitarian response plan for Somalia seeks about $1.5 billion to meet the country's most critical humanitarian needs.
Beyond the issue of drought response, the United Nations stands ready to support the Jubaland administration in the formation of district councils and in advancing reconciliation within Jubaland state. We urge in this regard due representation of women, youth, and minority communities in governance and leadership.
Issues of stronger federal and state collaboration, peace and state building also come up. The UN official also underscores that the areas of security, reconciliation, social and economic development need to be inclusive.
In South Africa's apex court, the Constitutional Court has declared the country's 1978 Copyright Act unconstitutional, ruling in favour of Blind SA represented by Public Interest Law Centre, Section 27. Blind SA is a non-profitable organisation established for the purpose of promoting the interests of blind and visually impaired people in South Africa. The Copyright Act prohibited persons with visual and print disabilities to have access to written works in accessible format copies such as audio and braille without the permission of the copyright holder. In 2020, Blind SA marched to the seat of government in Pretoria, the Union's building, to hand over a memorandum of demands to the president of the country. They also headed to court.
The crux of the matter had been Blind South Africa's contention that the country's Copyright Act 78 of 1978 limits the availability of works under copyright in formats accessible to persons with print and visual disabilities. The unanimous judgment written by Justice David Unterhalter was read by Justice Jody Kolapin.
This court has found that provisions of the Copyright Act are inconsistent with the Constitution. We consider the extent to which this is so. The order proposed by Blind SA is too wide and in some respects imprecise. First, it referenced all works under copyright. The case that Blind SA made out concerns literary works and to an extent artistic works that may form part of a literary work.
The judgment acknowledges that the Copyright Act is unconstitutional, specifically because of the way that it limits persons who are blind and visually impaired in the way they're able to access accessible format copies like materials such as Braille, but also very importantly that it violates important rights like the right to equality, the right to dignity, the right to freedom of expression, the right to basic and further education, the right to participate in a cultural life, which are important rights for persons who are blind and visually impaired. So we are really thrilled that there is an acknowledgement of these violations.
In December 2021, a Pretoria High Court had declared South Africa's Copyright Act unconstitutional to the extent that it fails to make exceptions to grant access to print works in the relevant format for the visually impaired persons, in line with the Marrakesh Treaty of 2013, to which South Africa is a signatory. For Blind SA, this Constitutional Court judgment is a relief that's been long awaited.
This has been a struggle that blind and partially sighted people have been advocating for now for decades. The relief, I think once we send a message to blind people around the country would, I'm sure, be celebrated. It also now removes the stigma of us being criminals by having to convert these text into accessible format so that we can have access to information, we can have access to education, and just for leisure reading.
The legislative process to amend the Copyright Act has actually been ongoing since 2015. The Copyright Amendment Bill was passed in Parliament in March 2019. On June 16, 2020, the bill was referred back to Parliament by the President. The delay prompted Blind SA to go to court.
And we shall be advocating further with different departments so that they can ensure that the relief is brought to light. We do not have to wait anymore for any access in alternative formats. We need that now, and we need that today.
The Constitutional Court confirmed the order of the High Court only to the extent of limited access to the blind and visually impaired. It ordered the reading in of Section 13 of the Copyright Act, which deals with exemptions, which is to endure for 24 months to enable Parliament to cure the defect in the Act, which has given rise to its invalidity. The Minister for Trade, Industry and Competition has also been ordered to pay the applicants' costs. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
And that's a win promoting the interests of the blind and visually impaired in South Africa. That's our program this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Melissa Walker. Goodbye.